Hey everybody, it's Tracy Brown, and I'm so glad to share with you part four of four in the secret fears of LGBTQ plus champions. And I hope that you have seen parts one, two, and three. And I love that reminder. It's like what some of your champions may not tell you, but you really need to know. What some of the allies might not tell you, but you really need to know. That's what this series has been all about. Um, and so, in this last part of the series, we're going to look at and think about how do we focus on building trust, seeding true transformation, and nurturing long term success. And this quote really sticks out for me. I've thought about it a lot, off and on. Trust each other again and again. When the trust level gets high enough, people transcend apparent limits, discovering new and awesome abilities of which they were previously unaware. What happens a lot when we're talking about our champions and our allies is we think about it in an episodic way, or we think about it related to this event or that event, and we miss the opportunity, excuse me, to really build the trust over a long period of time that removes the limits. And I don't mean just remove the limits for the champions, but for the organization or for the community. That limits that we've looked at or assumed must be true begin to break down when we're building this long term trust. And so, being able to trust your champions to really represent your values and your mission, really being able to include them in ways that makes them know they are trusted, can have benefits for individual champions, but also for your overall initiatives related to equity and mobility for your LGBTQ plus members or employees or communities, constituents. And so in this fourth part of the series, I'm really thinking about what does success look like? And I know this is tricky because success will look different in every organization depending on where you are on your journey. But I think we could all keep this in mind. Success is no longer about changing strategies more often, but having the agility to execute multiple strategies concurrently, right? I think in the past, a lot of times we felt there was a direct line to success. And then if that wasn't working, we would just change our strategy. And so we would be working on this strategy and then we would change to this strategy. But this quote reminds us that really in the 21st century, we have got to be able to execute multiple strategies concurrently. So, as it relates to growing, recruiting, and growing and nurturing, and now sustaining success with having allies for our LGBTQ plus initiatives and commitments, we've we've got to have multiple strategies. And so, just like I've done in a couple of the other segments, I'm going to share with you some suggestions of things that you could think about. And there's 7 suggestions, and you may not be able to use them all, but my hope is that at least 3 or 4 of them resonate with you or give you an idea of how you can build on what I share to have long term success in your organization. So, number one, some of you won't be surprised. I really want you to focus on education over the long term. Are you providing people with the definitions for terms and with key trends that are happening? And do they know how to recognize and then navigate cultural norms? I have to smile a little bit here because, oh, I don't know, maybe about 6 weeks ago, I was working with an organization and I was taking a group of 25 leaders through some conversation around being cross culturally effective. And they had been in breakout groups, and one of the groups came back and a couple of people said, yeah, in our group, we were having this whole conversation about we understand there's a Black culture and a white culture, but we don't really understand how we're using culture with all these other, what I would call dimensions of diversity. And so, yes, there are cultural norms within the LGBTQ plus community and within your initiatives. And each one of those groups has some cultural norms. And so make sure that your champions are able to not only recognize, but feel comfortable navigating different cultural norms, especially if the cultural norms are different from their own. So remember, you can have champions who actually self-identify as part of the LGBTQ plus community or identity, and you can have champions who don't. So in either case, they may not be familiar with some of the norms that are related to some of the groups. So for long-term sustainability, you want to be providing this kind of education to your champions. Number two, you might want to consider establishing a book club because you want to create some regular opportunities to expand awareness and to give people an opportunity to learn from each other and to have discussions with each other. I have labeled this as, think about a book club, but it might not be a book club. One client organization that I was working with a couple of years ago said, a lot of our people have told us they don't like to read or they don't read, but they'll watch a movie or a film. And so they created a film series where they would show a film and then have a discussion about it. Another group that I've worked with in the past, we didn't do full feature films, but we found TED Talks and TEDx Talks. And so we would have every month 2 or 3 talks that people would know. We would advertise and say, these are the videos of the talks we're going to discuss this month. And we would show them. And then, we'd never take more than 30 minutes. So we would have 2 or 3, but we would never take more than 30 minutes. And then we would have an hour to talk about it. Now, obviously, we would make sure the 2 or 3 talks that we selected had something in common, and then that would become the theme. So it might be a book club. It might be an opportunity to share about videos or TED Talks. And one organization I worked with in 2019, I guess, it was right before the pandemic. they already had in place a series where they brought people together and they distributed articles each month. And then they would invite people in their workforce who wanted to talk about the article or the articles for the month. And they did that on a monthly basis. The point here is really to give people a regular opportunity not only to grow and expand their awareness, but to discuss with others. Number three, related to representation, send some of your champions to conferences and to events. Use them as official representatives of your organization. Now, this might be a little sensitive if you only can send one or two people to an event or to a conference, and you are thinking, well, we want our LGBTQ plus community to be represented, so we're going to choose someone who represents one of the letters in that list. And what I would suggest is that that makes sense. And if you want your champions, especially your cisgender champions, to truly be committed and engaged, that there are times when you want to make sure that some of them are included and that they get the message that you're not just wanting them around to help behind the scenes, but that you actually see them as someone who is a champion for this community and for these employees, and that they can speak to whatever needs to be spoken to, or they can represent the mission and the values of the initiative for your organization. So that's number three. Number four, regularly update the resources that you are providing your champions. Maybe this goes without saying, and I definitely will not call out any organization's name, but just a few months ago, I was meeting with an organization. We were talking about doing some work together. And as it worked out, I did not end up working with this group. But one of the things that came up when we were discussing the possibility, I was able to review some of the resources that they were providing. And the resources were like 15 years old. I didn't see anything, that any reference, that any resource that they were providing their employee resource groups or their employees who were involved. I didn't see anything that was less than 10 years old. There were a lot of good resources, but they weren't current. So when you think about the videos that you provide, the articles, the experts, the webinars, the organizations, the books, you want to make sure that you have some classics. It's okay to have some classics or some things that have been around for a long time because they become key basics that everyone should be aware of, but that shouldn't be your entire list. And with the organization I just referred to, when I asked them about what really had happened was that someone had developed this list out of their own personal passion. It had not really been a part of their strategy. And along the way, that person left the organization and no one else ever thought about or committed to update it. And so I'm guessing that by now, this was several months ago, I'm guessing that somebody has updated it now. But if you want your champions to be effective, they're using the resources you give them and sharing those resources with other people. At least if you're giving them good and timely and meaningful resources. And that's what you want them to do. And so you want to give them links to PFLAG and tell them what PFLAG is, and maybe you want to direct them to all kinds of publications, especially in the last 3 to 4 years, have added glossaries of terms, or here are 10 terms related to LGBTQ plus that you need to know, from USA Today to the Wall Street Journal to O Magazine or Oprah Daily. You can find resources that are current or that are recent that your champions will be proud and excited to share. So we've got a few more. Let's keep going. Lead. Train your champions to be leaders. Give them what they need, tools, resources, as in the previous slide, but it could be really teaching, providing workshops or online courses so that your champions can speak on behalf of your organization. They can teach others. They can coach colleagues around terminology, around values, and around your organization's mission and commitment to the LGBTQ plus employees or members or community members. You have such a valuable resource in your champions. Don't waste it. Continuity. Involve me year round, not just during Pride Month. This is something that really surprises me. It seems so basic and so obvious, but I have heard so many people who have been involved say, well, yeah, well, June, that's going to be a really busy month. And I'll ask, well, throughout the rest of the year, how do you keep this conversation going? And they'll say, well, no, we get invited in maybe in April just to sign up to support all the things that are going on in June. And then we're kind of done, as a champion, as someone who is an ally. And so it's, wow, you've got 12 months out of the year. I did, when I was doing some focus groups around this that I referred to back in the first episode of this series, I did have people tell me that, they had volunteered, but they really weren't volunteering anymore because it felt like their organization was just doing performative inclusion. Oh, it's Pride Month, we better do something that's really visible, but then they're not doing anything the rest of the year. So I've switched my focus to this other group, right? And, I might help out sometimes, but it's not a priority anymore. Well, we're today talking about long-term success. And so over the long term, if you want to truly engage people, then you need to have things happening throughout the year. And number 7 is focus groups. So I mentioned that I've done focus groups with a few organizations with their LGBTQ plus employees or members, and also with people who were champions or volunteers or labeled in the organization as allies. And And so periodically, you want to solicit some kind of structured feedback. And you do focus groups, but you also could do a questionnaire or polls or a survey. But every now and then, now this is not something I think that you do every year. I think that's a little much unless you're in the middle of planning a new strategy and you need that kind of input or feedback. But in general, maybe every 3 years, every so often, you do need to touch base, not only for your own information to have a better strategy, but also it sends a message to your champions that you really do care about their feedback and you are committed to getting that feedback in a structured way periodically going forward. So those are the 7 things that I just want you to think about. When I think about great resources, I think that is the number one, because educating your champions continuously. We talk about continued education and lifelong learning for a reason. What I know at any point of time, nothing is static. So a year or 2 years or 5 years from now, different terminology may be being used, or there have been changes in the law, or there's changes in our leadership, in our organization, especially if it's a volunteer organization or a professional association where the leadership is elected and it changes. So there's no way I can overemphasize the importance of providing resources, educational resources, and education for your champions. I want you to really be successful. And I would encourage you to shift your thinking away from just what are we doing right now, which of course you have to pay attention to what you're doing right now, but to think about how you invest in your champions so that you can have a long term, you can have long term depth, you can have long term stability, you can have long term engagement. So this Deb Haaland quote is really helpful to remind us we absolutely must shift our thinking away from short-term gain and toward long-term investment and sustainability. And always have the next generations in mind with every decision we make. Now, clearly, this is true about our climate and our natural resources and water and recycling and all of that. It's also true as we think about our LGBTQ plus champions. So that's what I have to share with you in week 4 of 4, focused on trust transformation and long-term success with your LGBTQ plus champions. This series, The Secret Fears of LGBTQ plus Champions, has given you an episode each Wednesday in June. And if you missed any of them, there is a link to the playlist in the description. Week 1, we focused on what is it that actually contributes to fear or reluctance or why people hesitate to be a champion. Week 2, we looked at how could we increase comfort if we're the ones, increase our own comfort if we're approaching people who might potentially be champions for us. And in that week, I also talked a little bit about the distinction I use between allies and champions. Week 3, ideas for nurturing relationships with existing champions. And we did more of that today in week 4, looking at truly long term success. My name is Tracy Brown, and I hope this series has been helpful for you. I wanted this year to do something a little bit different than just highlight historical facts or key famous people who are a part of the LGBTQ plus spectrum, and to provide a little bit of education and hopefully inspiration for you to use in your own initiatives. For more information, you can always check out achieving.inclusion.com about not only this series, but other webinars and online summits that we have hosted at Intentional Inclusion Inc. Until the next time, please do your best to contribute to a world where inclusion is becoming the norm. Bye for now.